Georgia, next 3 years, number 1 program in college football.
Josh Pate is the premier college football personality on YouTube. Well, outside of me, of course. Kidding, but I'm going to evaluate his top 15 programs over the next 3 years.
They're 42-2 over the last 3 years. They're an elite recruiting program. They're also an elite development program, so you don't have to worry about what happens to the 4- and 5-star talent when it gets there.
I really don't think there is an argument to the contrary that Georgia should be number 1 overall. I won't spend too much time on it because, well, I wax poetic about Kirby all the time on this channel. His biggest nemesis, the guy that actually beat him the 2 times, is out. His name is Nick Saban.
Number 2 program in college football over the next 3 years, it's Alabama. It's the same as we would have called it recently, only there was a coaching change there. If the legend leaves behind immaculate facilities and a top-notch infrastructure, take over for the legend, especially if you yourself are legit, which Kalen DeBoer is. So the program is top-notch. Recruiting over the past 3 years has been number 1 on average in the country. They will be top 5, I think, now and moving forward because look at how they're acquiring talent already. That was the great unknown.
Major disagreement for me here. Yes, the talent is there, but there's going to be some type of drop-off from Saban to DeBoer, especially considering Ryan Grubb goes to the Seattle Seahawks and the play calling falls on DeBoer now, and the drop-off from Penix to Milroe is pretty big if you ask me. Milroe holds on to the football way too long, takes far too many sacks, where Michael Penix is an all-time great at sack avoidance. And Alabama's schedule draw is actually kind of tough. They have to play Georgia the next 2 years. In 25 and 26, they have to play Florida State out of conference. Put on top of that Oklahoma, LSU, and Tennessee. Man, I just don't know if Alabama's just going to run over these teams like they used to. I think you'll see a few losses mixed in there. Yes, it does help that they play Vanderbilt in 24 and 25, but still, it's a little too rich to have Alabama number 2 during a transition year.
I've got Texas as the number 5 program in college football over the next 3 years. Texas recruiting, you see what they're doing. Portal, you have seen and will continue to see what they're doing. Resources, they take a back seat to no one there. Pedals fully down on the floorboard. They'll do whatever it takes to win.
I feel this is fair. I believe Texas should be ahead of Alabama. Should they be ahead of Ohio State and Oregon that were ahead of them on this list? Potentially, yes. I'll give you my full rankings here at the end. But look, Sark might treat me like he did this guy in the headset. But I'm not the biggest Quinn Ewers guy, as many of you know. I could see Arch Manning taking over this job eventually. But, you know, the schedule sets up kind of nicely for them. You know, Kentucky and Vanderbilt locked in for the next 2 years. Those programs aren't good. Out of conference, though, you get Michigan, then Ohio State again in 2026. That's kind of tough. I also am not the biggest fan of their defensive staff. They lose a good defensive line coach in Bo Davis to LSU. Pete Kwiatkowski, can he get the secondary to be better? I don't know.
There is a big misconception that because their over-under win total is not quite as high as Texas or Georgia, etc., coming into this first year for them in the SEC, that they're not a high-level program. They've been a top 10 program already. They've been a top 10 program in recruiting and portaling each of Brenton Venables' first 3 seasons in Norman. There's a reason they just locked him up to a longer-term contract. They've got equity like you wouldn't believe built in that brand already. So benefit of the doubt already goes to Oklahoma. Maximum investment in the program.
So a lot of what he just said applies more to Michigan and LSU, and he still has Oklahoma ahead of them. Ugh. Now, sure, Oklahoma won a key NIL battle versus LSU, and you can like Venables better than Sharon Moore, but I still don't get it. I did a Jackson Arnold film study. Put the camera on me. Come on. Get right here. Okay. It's floating. Let me see. I'm not doing this smoothly at all. I can't. Oh, it's okay. It's right here, floating in the top right corner of your screen. And these 3 programs play each other a lot, right? You'll see LSU on the schedule the next 2 seasons for Oklahoma, and 25 and 26, Michigan plays a home-and-home with the Sooners.
I think Texas A&M is going to be a top 10 college football program in the coming 3 years because I have maximum belief in Mike Elko. Purely looking forward, not what they have been. They've been the biggest underachiever in America for a long time.
Yeah, this is the biggest NIL resource school in the country. I mean, the pockets there are deep. and the schedule sets up really nicely for them. No Georgia, no Tennessee, no Alabama for the next 2 years. If you like Mike Elko, and if you also like Colin Klein, and if you also, like me, like Connor Wigman, I've done a lot of videos on my NFL channel and SEC channel on how much I like Connor. You should be buying in as well. So, not appalled by this, still a little too high.
I put LSU as the number 11 program in America over the next 3 years. Very intentional with this. Brian Kelly, I got no doubt about him. Well established, ton of accolades, all deserved. We are not an anti-Brian Kelly show. We're a pro-Brian Kelly show. The staff moves on defense were elite. Most upgraded defensive staff in America, to me, is LSU. And while that may not pay off in a top 10 unit this year, it will pay off moving forward if he keeps those guys there. So the moves they made were great. The portal moves they made were not. And that's one mild concern I have moving forward. But recruiting overall is very good, and it will continue to be. Bryce Underwood, as long as something terrible doesn't happen, will sign with LSU, and they'll have the number one quarterback in the country over the coming 3 seasons. I think internal alignment could be better within the program, and that is a multi-layered statement that I don't care to dive into any further.
So, any of you that know me personally, well, you know about Power Hour LSU, my huge Tigers YouTube community, and huge is subjective, but still, this is the open of my live show. It's just some B-roll for you. So yeah, I'm an LSU fan. I actually do agree with Pate with the alignment stuff because, well, there was some miscommunication with some transfer portal needs and NIL fulfillment that LSU came up short on, in particular to Oklahoma. With all of that said, LSU still does have NIL, and they still do have some of the best brand equity that Josh was talking about a minute ago. And if you are bullish on the defensive hires, which I am as well, then you have to not have LSU at 11. I don't see how Brian Kelly, who's won a lot more than Brent Venables has at Oklahoma, and Garrett Nussmeier, who could be there for 24 and 25, to hand the reins to Bryce Underwood in 2026. And with Blake Baker as the defensive coordinator, I am very bullish on LSU moving forward. And most of all, the schedule sets up so nicely for LSU over the next 2 seasons in the SEC, especially if you think there's going to be some drop-off with Clemson, who's their out-of-conference opponent in 25 and 26. It is hard to not have LSU in the top 5, but at 11, that's egregious.
Josh Heupel plus a top-level quarterback. What does that mean? 2 years ago, it meant they had the number 1 offense in the country. Nico Iamaleava is going to be there for a majority, at least, of the next 3 seasons. They made sneaky good portal moves this past season, and I think they'll continue to do that. They're a big player in NIL. They're in a number of the big recruitments out there. They're not far away now. Like, they got that signature win a couple of years ago against Bama, but as a program, I still don't think they've really arrived at the head table, but they're not that far away. The 12-team playoff era for Tennessee will be about as beneficial as any program in the SEC because they're going to be the kind of program with the head coach they have and the offense they run that has the ability to get red hot in November. Doesn't matter if they have 2 or 3 losses. That's the one you'll find yourself saying you don't want to play. That's the one that'll be the hot team down the stretch. That quarterback, don't want to run into him in the playoff. That's the caliber that Tennessee could be at the low end. At the high end, they don't need to be talked about like that. You may just flat out find yourself talking about him as a national championship contender wire to wire. They have that high-end ability. There are some areas they take a back seat to. In other words, they're not quite elite in all the categories that maybe a Georgia is, but they're plenty close enough to where their best shot is enough to take you down. Tennessee at number 11 or 12. Tennessee at number 12.
In the words of Soulja Boy, word for word, bar for bar, agree with everything Pate had to say about Tennessee. Is actually a pretty spot-on ranking, and the schedule shapes up semi-nicely. Out-of-conference games, NC State, Syracuse, and Nebraska over the next 3 years. And yes, you have to play Georgia and Alabama, but you do avoid LSU. You do avoid A&M and some other tough teams in Texas as well. I like it. I'm bullish on Tennessee. Now, this is Pate's final rankings, okay? And before I give you mine, feel free to comment down below yours. Top 8, obviously you'll see a lot of disagreement from me. The bottom 3 after Tennessee, by the way, was Miami, Clemson, and Penn State. So this is my top 5. UGA and Ohio State. I do think there is a tier drop to Oregon here. I am perfectly fine with Oregon with the NIL resources that they have, the recruiting they have going for 2025. Mix that in with a very favorable schedule over the next 2 years. I think Oregon's a lock to make the playoff over the next 2 years at least. Texas at 4 and LSU at 5 over Alabama. I know that's going to generate the most disagreement, but oh well. I still like Alabama moving forward, but for all the reasons mentioned earlier, there is some concern there. Notre Dame has a pretty bright future as well. Move Tennessee up a few slots ahead of Florida State. We don't even know what conference they're going to be in. And obviously, Oklahoma way down at 10 compared to them being at 8 on Josh's list. USC didn't even make Pate's top 15. I have them up at 11. I don't feel comfortable about it at all. Texas A&M, Michigan, Penn State, in Miami. Cristobal is a recruiter, great as an in-game coach. And then some honorable mentions for you. Clemson, Missouri, who I like a lot, have made money betting there over the last 2 seasons. Washington, Ole Miss, obviously very shaky after this next year. Auburn, UCF, SMU, and Houston. Here are some other opinions from AYS and Aaron Torres, some fellow YouTubers, and I need your opinion down below. Josh does great work, and hopefully you think I do too. Floating in your face, some other videos, so make sure you check them out. We'll talk to you next week, baby. Let's go. So close to the season. Let's go.